Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on all of these occasions on our heritage.org website, as well as those watching on C-SPAN this morning. For those in-house, please check that cell phones have been turned off as a courtesy to our presenters. And, of course, we will welcome questions at any time, simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org from any of those watching online. Hosting our discussion today is Dr. Ariel Cohen, Senior Research Fellow in Russian and Eurasian Studies in our Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies. He has a first-hand knowledge of the former Soviet Union and the Middle East, and his work focuses on such issues as economic development and political reform in the former Soviet republics, U.S. energy security, the global war on terrorism, and the continuing conflict in the Middle East. He has served as a consultant to both the executive branch and the private sector on policy toward Russia, Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. He co-authored Russian Imperialism and Crisis, as well as Eurasia in Balance, focusing on the Eastern European region. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ariel Cohen. Ariel?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is my particular pleasure to welcome Ilya Ponomarev to the Heritage Foundation. It is a pleasure because I always admire people who have courage to speak truth to power. It is not easy in any society. It is particularly not easy in today's Russia. Ilya could have a wonderful life in Russia. He was the youngest president of the U.S. Oil Company back in the 90s at the age of 24. He worked for multinational oil services companies like Schlumberger. He is extremely gifted as a youngster, as a 14-year-old. He was teaching computers in the Soviet Nuclear Physics Institute to the old guys who didn't know at the time about PCs. So either a career of a conformist politician or a businessman would have saved Ilya a lot of trouble. Instead, he decided to take principled stances. He was the only one in the Duma who voted against the so-called gay propaganda law, and most importantly, he voted against the annexation of the Crimea, and that took a lot of courage. Ilya worked in this country in high tech. He has background in investment, and as I said already, in oil and gas. He was the member of the Duma for the Just Russia Party, Spravedlivaya Россия, and he is really a political star. In any other democracy, he would have been already a vice minister, a minister, and a respected member of legislation. Instead, as he is going to tell us, his going is rough and is becoming rougher. So Ilya, welcome, and let's have a meaningful conversation about what's going on. So the first question I would like to ask you, what made you vote, the only vote against annexation of the Crimea? I remembered the votes in the German parliament in the beginning of World War I. I believe it was Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg who paid with their life for the vote against the senseless world war. What makes you stand up and say no when everybody else is voting yes?
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm actually blushing, and I think that you were too kind speaking like that. But indeed, the inspiration was coming from Comrade Liebknecht, from that particular example. Although the person who convinced me to do what I have done was Vladimir Putin. You know, it was 2 days before the actual vote was taking place in Duma. It was a presidential address to the National Assembly, to the Senate and to the lower chamber, to the State Duma. And there was a big crowd of people, maybe 1,000 people altogether, because there were member of parliament plus governors and some other invited guests. And everybody was just shouting and waving hands and, you know, praising Putin, hailing the chief, and saying, let's take over Crimea. And that was so, it reminded me so much of the Soviet past and the negative aspects of the Soviet past, take me correctly. So firstly I decided to sit and not to stand up and not to join that cheering crowd. And secondly, I decided that I have to vote against. I was hesitant whether I should just not take part in the vote or should I vote against. That time I was convinced that I should vote against. And that is the emotional part. The rational part is that being, of course, patriot of Russia, I was thinking that this move to take over Crimea is extremely unbeneficial for my country. What we ending up with, firstly, our brother nation of Ukraine is no longer a friend. And whatever dreams we had about the union, about the cooperation, about the joint projects, went down in ashes. We were always thinking about the issues of national security and were saying that NATO should never come to Ukraine and Ukraine should remain neutral. And that was pretty much supported by Ukrainian people. In 2013, national polls in Ukraine indicated that from 15 to 17% were in favor of joining NATO, others were against. Now, after our move, majority of Ukrainians want to be part of NATO. And that's also not beneficial for Russia. Thirdly, is the question of international investments and technological climate in my country. We now became alienated from the rest of the world. And even without like an open confrontation, and I'm pretty skeptical about the sanctions that are being imposed on Russia, but it's clear that the investment climate is significantly worse than it was just half a year before. The capital run from Russia this year is estimated in between 150 and 200 billion USD. That means that every single citizen of Russian Federation paid more than $1,000 for annexation of Crimea. And that is twice as much as we are investing in healthcare. This is 7.5 times more than we invest in R&D. And
on per capita basis.
It's in absolute figures. I mean, the budget per annum for healthcare in Russia is 71 billion US, and the capital fee 150 plus, right?
Okay. So let me ask you this. The ideological and spiritual climate in Russia that a lot of folks in the US have a hard time following because of the language, because we're preoccupied with our domestic issues, Obamacare, we're preoccupied with China.
Good for you.
But to focus on what's happening in Russia socially and ideologically, you really either have to live there or have to spend a lot of time doing that, like myself being addicted to the Russian Facebook. And what I see is a quick change, it's a fast change, from sort of laissez-faire, soft authoritarian model that we had in the past decade, and from the 2000 to 2004, and then again maybe under Medvedev, it was authoritarian, but it was not particularly harsh as far as authoritarian models are concerned. Ukraine is a catalyst, or actually the change started to happen even before Ukraine, with the ban on adoption of Russian kids, with the ban on support of Russian nonprofits by Western funders, the anti-gay propaganda law. So all kinds of things that the state is increasing its interference in people's lives. How does Ukraine affect that, and where is it all moving? Where is it going?
Well, Ariel, I think that those changes, they are pretty much on the surface. The fundamentals are the same. And the fundamentals are such that Russia, as United States, is a nation which believes in its mission. And even our missions are pretty similar. We believe in freedom. We believe in distributing our core values. It was communist time when Russians thought that those communist ideas are the light of freedom and liberation for our neighbor's nation and for the rest of the world. And we defeated fascism. And
in a coalition with the United States.
But we believe that we did it on our own.
Never heard of Lend-Lease, right?
No, because really, it's official number is 28 million perished during World War II, and that is something that every single family in Russia has suffered. Every single family has. And
getting to Ukraine
yes.
today, what role is it playing?
I'm getting it.
Right.
I'm getting there. So there was a mission which suddenly disappeared in 90s and 2000s. But it didn't go anywhere, because at our core it was still there. And the biggest holiday and the biggest national idea for Russia during all those years was the Victory Day.
May 9th, not May 8th.
Yeah, because of the time difference,
Right.
That's why.
The European victory in World War II,
Yeah,
right?
was
Which Stalin made sure that it won't be the same day as the Europeans are celebrating, but
okay.
that's aside, right?
Yes. Anyway, so that is our main national holiday, and that's what unites the whole nation, is the fight against the fascism. And how it was presented to the nation by President Putin is that in Ukraine, those are Western-sponsored fascists who came to power. And he illustrated that with flags of former Ukrainian Liberation Army, who were allies with SS during World War II. And so he used this to prove that these are fascists who are fighting against both Russian and Ukrainian nation. Mm-hmm. So it's misinterpretation that we are looking just to protect Russians or Russian-speaking minority. No, for the overwhelming majority of Russians, we are continuing World War II. And we are really liberating Ukraine from the fascist threat. And more, we are thinking about re-liberating the whole of Europe. Because what is Europe these days? It's these gay people, these are Arabs who are destroying European civilization and Christianity. And Putin is always referring to those values of Christianity and our beliefs and our tradition and whatever. So he is extremely conservative in this sense. That's why his allies in Europe are movements like French Le Pen,
Marine Le Pen, the head of the National Front.
And other ultra-right conservatives in many countries. And after recent elections to European Parliament, they were in all Russian media were presented as a huge success of those writers.
Isn't there a paradox? You have some family members who were specialists on different political movements in the outside world.
Yeah, mainly left wing. Yeah.
So the Soviet Union, until about 87 or even 89, was a great supporter of communist and leftist movements all over the world. I wrote my master's thesis about that.
Right.
Now, only 25 plus years later, Russia is viewed, or Putin is viewed, as not just an ally, but as a guiding light to the neo-fascist Hungarian party Jobbik, or Jobbik in Russian, or to Marine Le Pen of Front National, or to German National Democrat Party, which is neo-Nazi, and somehow the Ukrainian ultranationalists are put aside. And by the way, the percentage of vote in the recent presidential election in Ukraine in favor of ultranationalists is only 10%, whereas in France and Hungary it's 20% or higher for these guys. So what is the swing of this pendulum from left to right? What's going on here?
Well, you see, I think that those extremes, they are getting pretty close to each other. And even if you look on U.S. example and our brilliant channel Russia Today, it's been admired by both Tea Party followers and Occupy Wall Street followers, right?
Well, maybe occupied Wall Street and the Russia Today, but I didn't see that.
You know, you are not that familiar with Tea Party.
I'm not that
activism,
familiar,
yes.
right. And
I will show you examples.
with exception, a particular member of Congress, I cannot think of anybody who admires Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, so I think it's actually pretty natural because Putin during last 20 years in general, our officials, they are trying to capitalize on the ancestry of the Soviet Union, but trying to flip it from the ideas of world revolution and the leftist idea of internationalism to empire idea. And Stalin in our country is still extremely popular and is still being seen as the most successful leader of Russia in all ages.
How many people Stalin killed officially?
You know, there are a lot of speculations on that, but what I'm saying is about the national polls, that people who still support Stalin and identify themselves as Stalinists is between 25 and 30% in all polls.
People who think positively of Stalin.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that the research indicates that probably up to 20 million people were killed.
No, I think that 20 million is not accurate, but it doesn't matter. Even if it would be 100,000, that would still be a lot.
But if you're taking the Civil War, the collectivization of agriculture in the early 30s, and the repressions, millions of people.
Whatever, let's not go in this discussion, but my point is that Stalin, during Soviet Union times, was always seen and driven on the leftist agenda. Right now, it's been seen as a great emperor and the great conqueror and the beholder of the empire. And Putin is trying to build his background from Stalin and trying to capitalize on that.
Do you remember when Putin said, we were weak and the weak are beaten?
Yes.
That was a direct quote from Josip Vissarionovich.
Yeah, I believe so, right.
I want to move on to something that is close to your heart, I know. Innovation and foreign investment. You were a lead on the Skolkovo project. Skolkovo project was brought to partial end. And I don't see anything that is replacing it as sort of a magnet for pushing forward Russian high-tech, getting young entrepreneurs to develop their ideas. From what I read, a lot of people emigrate, people who want to do business in their 20s or early 30s. What is going on with that? And what are the impediments today to investment and entrepreneurship in Russia?
You know, there are two trends in that community. One trend which is more visible, more vocal, and probably larger in quantity, is what you are saying is the trend to emigrate, to move outside country. There are several very visible examples, like Russian Mark Zuckerberg, Pavel Durov, the founder of Russian version of Facebook, Vkontakte, and as you might know, that's what I like to boast with. Facebook is number 4 Russian social network. It's not even number 2 and number 3.
After Одноклассники, ВКонтакте.
Yeah, Одноклассники, Vkontakte, and Mail.ru, and only 4th is Facebook. So our engineers are really great, and the greatest of them was Pavel Durov, and he said that he no longer wants to stay in Russia because of the attacks on Vkontakte from security people, and particularly from Mr. Sechin, who is trying to take over Vkontakte as the company. Then our biggest IT company, Yandex, is now under big attack. Our first and biggest system integration company, EDS-like company, IBS, announced that he's moving outside Russia. So there is a significant fleet. Flight of this of those groups. From the other side, several of our developers who are focused on domestic market, they think that it would be a bigger military procurement, that it would be higher demand for domestically developed technologies, and so that they would be getting more money. My personal opinion is that the increase in domestic spending for new technologies would be not so significant as people expect. Russia, during recent 20 years of liberal reforms, neoliberal reforms, lost its ability to produce a lot of high technology products and relies heavily on importing them from the outside, and restore serial production of those things would be extremely difficult and lengthy. So,
but I saw Mr. Rogozin pushing. Mr. Rogozin is vice premier for military industrial. He was pushing to shut down the GPS stations on the Russian territory. And I don't remember if he threatened or actually made a move to curb the use of Russian booster rockets to the space station. At least there was a threat, maybe a decision, I'm not sure. But are there any accomplishments, like with maybe GLONASS or space launches? What are the accomplishments so far of this very statist approach to innovation and high tech?
you see, I was always very vocal proponent of creating our own technologies, which would at least go pair to pair with international peers, and which would gradually replace them. The same thing as with GLONASS.
As an import substitution or as a global competition?
As a global competition, and of course domestically to use our internal market to boost the demand and to make money for our high-tech companies. And GLONASS is a great example of such a technology.
But do you believe that without competition in Russia from foreign competitors,
exactly
you can do it?
Exactly my point. If you're shutting down the competition, then you have no drive to increase your service and to increase quality. And quality of GLONASS is not yet there. It's being gradually improving, but it's not yet there. It had all the chances to become a global competitor with GPS, but we need to add like 5 years of stable work to achieve that. Same thing with, say, our domestic payment systems. Russia, when I was one of the programs that I was supervising was a transition to electronically services. government services. And
Is it an e-government?
like,
or is
yeah,
it
like
e-government?
like a government
Okay.
stuff, yeah.
Right.
And we wanted to develop our own Visa type cards to pay for those services, and then we had a sufficient market for them. But
This is your work with Ministry of Communication.
yes, that is right. But at that time, our ruling party voted against, because they were affiliated with several banks which were against. For them it was more profitable to work with Visa and MasterCard. Now, because of the national security concerns, they are trying to shut down Visa and MasterCard. But there is no replacement. So by shutting down Visa and MasterCard, you will just disrupt your payment services for your clients. And the whole banking system would...
The Russians are still sometimes using the abacus, and that is a good...
You are outdated, because...
So is abacus.
Because the penetration of credit cards in Russia right now is 83%.
83%. Wow. Okay, let's get back to issues that you as a legislator, you are concerned in the Duma and in the legislative process. Bringing back the issue of Ukraine, do you think the Russian legislative system, the Russian system of government that, according to my opinion, that I wrote about and published as one of the first things I've done here at the Heritage Foundation in '92, when Russia was considering, '93, considering different constitutional drafts, I said the drafts that later became the Russian Constitution are extremely centralizing. This is a super presidential republic, and with the Russian tradition of autocracy going back to general secretaries and to the tsars, this is going to backfire. It's going to create too much centralization of the executive branch and not enough balance of power of legislative and of the judiciary. Do you see Ukraine demonstrating that? If yes, how? And if yes, also, what would be the solutions?
If you wrote something here at Heritage Foundation, I'm not supposed to argue about that.
It wasn't Russian.
No, but I really agree with what you have just said. I think that indeed our problems have started from the Constitution of 1993. It was undemocratic. It was adopted in undemocratic circumstances. The majority of Russians didn't vote for that constitution. And on the public referendum, which took part in December '93, even according to official numbers, it was very narrow margin of passing that constitution in a situation when majority of voters actually abstained. And this really is a fundamental problem for Russian political and social and economic system.
What are the problems?
The problem is that the constitution was copied from the French constitution, but the role of president was disbalanced, and it was artificially given more powers than to the French president. In French system, president is part of the executive branch, and in Russian system, president is above all three branches. So the idea of checks and balances is ruined. And during Yeltsin's period of time, that was at least balanced by personality of Yeltsin, who had certain ideas about democracy.
And his health.
Oh, yeah, but even with those ideas in 1996, the elections were, how to say politely, very far from being sterile. And I think that actually it was not Mr. Yeltsin, but Mr. Zyuganov, the leader of the Communist Party, who has won that elections. And actually, I very much believe in the idea that if at that time Zyuganov would be allowed to win and to claim his victory, being a very weak person by himself, that would be very healthy for the political system, because that would create an example of transition
Democratic transition of power. Right,
like it happened, for example, in Poland, where Mr. Kwasniewski replaced Mr. Walensky.
But on the other hand, knowing both, I don't think Mr. Zyuganov is exactly a Democrat like Mr. Kwasniewski.
As I said, it's just pretty weak. And he also had certain business groups which were backing him at the time, and I think that he would be bound by his obligations, and he would not be able to change the system dramatically. Of course, there would be several step backs in certain areas, but they were not so drastic as many people believed.
Well, as they say in Russian, history cannot suffer conditionality, so we don't know what would have happened. But looking at the system today, do you think it's working? Do you think changes are needed? And if so, what kind of changes that would better serve the Russian society and the Russian political life?
That one of the biggest disputes in the ranks of Russian opposition about the role of constitution and about the constitutional reform. Right now, the majority of the opposition leaders, they lean towards deep and profound constitutional reform and transitioning from presidential republic to parliamentary republic. And I think that we have the perfect example of 4 years under President Medvedev that nothing happens if the country lives without a president.
So there was a president, de facto, who was prime minister.
He was a prime minister, he was a leader of parliamentary majority, so that's exactly how the parliamentary republic should work, and the president was pretty weak. So I think that it is a proven example that it would be safe and that the country would not collapse.
Or you can have
whatever.
a constitutional monarchy, like some people suggest.
That's also, by the way, very possible. Very possible.
Would you
way of
support that?
I actually would, yeah, because I think that according to the Russian tradition, we have such archetypes in our fairy tales, and that the monarch, that the father Tsar, is the person who judge, is not the person who rules. And to having such a ultimate judge at the top, who is not supposed to give any executive decision, but who is supposed to be the ultimate ruler in the conflicts of different business and political groups, that's, I think, is very stabilizing idea for the system.
We have that too. It's called the Supreme Court.
Yes, and that's, we had this discussion before. I really think that the judicial system should be the main system, should be the real spinal cord of the political system in Russia. It should not be neither executive nor legislation. It should be judicial system.
Okay, so just to...
But by the way, to finish here, not everybody in the opposition shares this, because some of our colleagues, many, especially new liberal type opposition, they say that.
Can you give us an example?
Say people like Georgy Satarov, for example, who were part of the Yeltsin system. They say, let's just restore the constitution. The constitution is good, just the law enforcement is bad. So let's just restore the constitution.
Well, Satarov was a part of the circle that pushed through the Yeltsin constitution.
Yeah, that is true. And other people, like, for example, Alexei Navalny, our famous blogger and the opposition leader, he says, no, the system is good, the Putin is bad.
He would be better.
Yes, let me step in his position, and I will fight the corruption, and the system would start working, which I don't believe.
You said something very interesting. You said that the organizing narrative, the organizing myth of Russia today, is a fight against fascism, Nazism in World War II, in coalition with the West, I would stress, and everybody knows, even school children who will learn
Just
history.
don't tell me that. I know.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah. But I'm not telling you. I'm telling our audience and the C-SPAN audience that even the kids who will learn Russian history from the unified history book that is already published or being prepared.
It's being prepared.
Being
that's right.
prepared. So there will be one narrative of history. Know that the British, the French, the Americans, and the Chinese fought against the Nazis and the Japanese imperialism in World War II. And you have people who are part of the establishment, like Andranik Migranyan, the political scientist who were planted in New York as a representative of the Institute for Democracy and something else, the Russian government funded operation, says, oh, but Hitler was good until 1939. Until 1939, that included the Nuremberg racial laws, the Anschluss of Austria, the Sudetenland partition of Czechoslovakia, and the Kristallnacht. So you have Nikonov, the grandson of Vyacheslav Molotov, your colleague in the Duma, saying, oh, the Aryan Slavic tribes descended from the Carpathian Mountains. So the narrative is becoming more and more racist, Nazi-like, justifying even Hitler, which is inconceivable in this myth of fighting German fascism. What's going on with that?
Well, you know, the people whom you mentioned, they can justify whatever they have been told to justify.
Who's telling them to justify that?
I think, you know, their instincts. They just want to please the chief.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually like when the chief says, no, 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 you are going too much, you know, please relax, you know.
But this is like Alexander Prokhanov, the old Soviet propagandist, saying all the time how wonderful Stalin was.
No, that's his position all the time. Mr. Prokhanov is a very well-known imperialist, and he is trying to portray Stalin as the emperor even during Soviet times. That's why even during Soviet times he was seen as a dissident, but right-wing dissident.
But he would not be doing that if he did not expect a pat on the back or maybe a spot on national television, maybe some advisory position somewhere.
No, with Prokhanov is a different story, because Prokhanov, as I said, he was doing this during Soviet times, he is doing this now, his position is very firm, he is dedicated to this idea, and he never flipped sides, and when he was in the opposition he was with Zyuganov, and he was fighting in the Russian White House when it was shot with the tanks. So
in 93 by Yeltsin.
In 93 by Yeltsin.
Okay.
Now, so it's now Putin's position who matches position of Prokhanov. It's not Prokhanov's position who starts to match Putin's position. So it's not that way.
But
with Migranyan and Nikonov, they don't have any position at all. You know, they have the position as the power has.
But what worries me is that sympathy, even with caveats, toward the Third Reich, is something that was inconceivable in Russia until, you know, maybe 3 or 5 years ago. Only people like Alexander Dugin, another Kremlin ideologist, who are articulating the idea of Eurasian empire, were in the 1980s members of secret pro-Nazi societies, secret orders that had SS background. So are you concerned that the sympathy towards Nazism is penetrating from the very margins of the Russian political life, with the Russian March, where people were raising their arms in Nazi salute, to establishment figures like Mr. Nikonov and Mr. Migranyan?
Let me explain here. I really do believe, and I'm very much concerned about the fascist threat in Russia. And that was seen as a trend for a pretty long period of time, and even without all those public speeches, just by talking to your constituency, back in rural areas and remote areas of Russia, you would see that this national dignity, which has been oppressed during 20 years, plus economic chaos, which has been associated with the West, and particularly with the actions of United States in building democracy in Russia and privatization campaign and whatever.
Is
You know,
it a
and Harvard
perception
guys,
through propaganda, or is it, or you think this was, mistakes were made, so to speak?
that was mistakes that were made, because the way how privatization was carried out
Privatization.
was it's actually programmed that there is no small business in the country, and that those oligarchs exist, and that their position is highly more competitive than the position of real entrepreneurs, grassroots entrepreneurs, that there is very oppressed high technology sector and very well developed natural resources sector,
Like
etc.,
extractive,
etc.
yeah.
That's also, that all went from the privatization, and privatization was carried out with the political rationale behind and not economic rationale behind. That was admitted many times by Mr. Chubais and by his friends that mostly live in Boston and in Washington.
But the political intention was, as they said at the time, and I was part of those debates, was to break the back of,
Yes.
of the communist establishment and move on to a whole new elite. And
And-
if you compare,
And you know Russian proverb that with good intentions you go to hell. And
it's
that's
not
exactly
a Russian,
what-
it's an American.
I'm saying that we're the same, you know, fundamentally.
Very good.
But coming back to the issue of fascism, if you look at those guerrilla fighters which are active in the eastern parts of Ukraine,
Pro-Russian.
well, pro-Russian, yeah,
Right.
and which are being seen as a military arm of Putin's administration. If you just come at their pages on the social networks, you would see the groups they are part of. Russia without Putin, Russia 2.0, they all are opposition groups. And
But the nationalist opposition.
they are nationalists, but
Yeah.
they are against Putin.
Right. And,
It's just
but,
that
but
the
he
Putin-
also had people from Barkashov's Russian National Unity, which
Yes,
is neo-Nazi.
Barkashov is against Putin.
Is he?
Dugin was always opposition to Putin. Prohanov
Now
was
he's not.
Now he is not, but that's not because they have changed their position. It's because Putin has changed his position. Because Putin started to match expectations of those guys. That's the problem. And they don't want Putin at the top of the government. They want Barkashov at the top of the government. They want Prohanov. They want Glaziev. They want those guys.
Glaziev is already getting up there. Probably one last question before we open for discussion. You had a fascinating presentation. I'm sure there are a lot of questions here, and there's also cameras, and people can send questions through the internet. If there is a political change, there's always a political change.
What do you
There
mean,
was a-
if?
when
When?
there is a political change. A lot of people think that in this town, some of them Russian democratic emigres, think that, oh, it'll just be a beautiful liberal democracy in Russia, and you know, all the
God forbid.
all the evil will be punished, and you know, the Boris Nemtsovs and the Garry Kasparovs will be in charge. I'll tell you the name of the person I'm quoting after this, and they're saying, oh, next year, we're going to have a change. In your estimate, when there is a change, it just may take longer than we think, but when there is change, is it violent? Is it peaceful? Is it a Maidan? Is it a colored revolution like Mr. Putin is afraid? Or is it something else? And what are the powers that are capable of not just overthrowing the regime? We saw the tragic results in the October 1917. What are the powers that can really build Russia that you wish? The Russia that is open to the world, that attracts investment, that fosters innovation, and that entrepreneurs and other people have freedom in such Russia?
I would start from the second part of your question, because my Russia is Russia of entrepreneurship. My Russia is a Russia of personal initiative. My Russia is Russia with a weak government and very strong grassroots self-governing institutions, with a networked community. My Russia is a Russia of intellect, open and part of the global Christian civilization, and I do believe in like global Northern Union of former Christian nations of Russia, Europe, and United States. We even had this.
Jokes aside, you sound like Tea Party.
You see, in Russia there is such a concept of third Rome, and it was initially
Moscow being third Rome,
initially referred as first Rome is Rome, second Rome is Byzantine, right, and and third Rome is Moscow. I really believe that actually it should be as Europe, U.S. and Russia.
Okay.
But this is like a long-term vision. Technologically, when you're saying about how the changes might occur, the liberal idea is extremely unpopular because it's been associated with 90s and with the chaos and with the poverty and with the corruption. And I don't expect that in any circumstances when the changes would occur, that the liberals, if it would be a fair process, would be able to come to power. But without their participation in the changes, because we have a revolution happening in the capital, and Russian capital Moscow is relatively pro-liberal city. So without their participation, the changes would not be possible because you cannot win Moscow without participation of liberal people. But if they are in charge, the rest of the regions would not follow. And we would see more violent scenario than in Ukraine. Most likely we will see a split in the country and the secession.
Geographic split.
Secession of many regions, and it would be way more violent and disruptive than what's happened in Ukraine. The coalition might work as the coalition between leftists and liberals, and as the coalition between nationalists and liberals. So far, our liberals, despite the rhetorics that they are internationalists and whatever, they are leaning more towards alliance with nationalists, with right-wing people, because they believe that nationalists don't have a solid economic agenda, and they do believe that in case of such coalition, it would be somebody like Navalny as the political power, and then there would be neoliberal people like Kudrin or Prokhorov or Kasyanov or Nemtsov at the top of the government.
For the sake of the audience, economically liberal in Russia, meaning less tax, smaller government. It's not socialist or social democrat, U.S. style, left wing of Democratic Party, for example. That's not that kind of liberalism.
No, it's in U.S. terms, it's more like neoconservative. Yeah. And of course, my position and what I'm trying to achieve. And by the way, this coalition between neoliberals and nationalists happened in Ukraine, and that's why you see what's going on there.
Absolutely.
And my position is to achieve the coalition between leftists and the liberals.
And then that isolates nationalists.
And isolate nationalists. Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's what I'm trying to do as much as I can. And that's what, by the way, even Kremlin thinks that it would be safer for them if it would be a coalition with nationalists. That's why they put to jail all my comrades from the left front. Among my 40 aides as member of parliament, 20 are under prosecution. And 10 are either in jail already or asked for political asylum in other countries.
What about yourself? Is this personal threat to you?
Being an MP, I am immune. But
what's happening with your status as an MP?
They are now trying to revoke my status, and already such a law which is personally targeted on myself, already was introduced to State Duma. And the day before yesterday, as I was flying in the airplane, Mr. Mironov, leader of my former party, Just Russia, was meeting Mr. Putin and asked his personal sanction to put this law into force. We'll see.
Well, as I said in the beginning, you're taking tremendous political risks. We respect them. We admire your stance, your principled stance on a number of these issues. And at this point, we have 11 minutes for Q&A. Maybe I'll extend it a little bit. When you are asking a question, please introduce yourself and keep it to a question, and please keep it short so other people can also ask questions. Who would like to start?
My name is Sahan, and my question...
Wait for the mic. And your affiliation, please.
Hello, my name is Sahan, and I am interning this summer here in Washington, D.C. And my question is, as we know that the West did some sanctions on Russia, but still recently Russia signed a very big oil deal with China.
Gas.
Gas deal with China, and certainly many political economists are saying that this is kind of to challenge the dollar hegemony and the dollar dominance, the petrodollar in particular. Do you think that the Russian economy, even with these sanctions, can still sustain itself, given that it has a large natural gas and natural oil base? And do you think that using this using this natural gas stockpile, can you think that can they challenge dollar hegemony and sustain its economy even with the Western sanctions?
Firstly, on the issue of sanctions, in 90s we have such a saying in Russia about the West and about U.S. that you pretend that you're helping us, we pretend that we are doing reforms. So you pretend that you are sanctioning us, we pretend that we are afraid. There are no sanctions. Those are sanctions against a very narrow circle of people. Most of them don't care about them at all. And West, even taking the approach of sanctions that has been taken, sanctions about certain personalities, it would be at least meaningful if they would be targeted not to the very top layer of people, but more to the middle layer of management, to disrupt that loyalty. And they actually, Russian parliament even voted, Putin wanted to tie everybody, and the Russian parliament voted asking for the sanctions to be imposed on the members of Russian parliament, but it never happened. And I actually think that the sanctions, generally, they are not productive. What is productive is to enforce your own legislation against money laundering. Because what's happening is that people are stealing from Russian federal budget and then moving this capital and investing them in Western economies, mainly in European, but in US also. So to enforce that part of legislation against money laundering, against corruption, that would be very helpful. And I was asking many times to put a special prosecutor in Europe, special prosecutor in US, maybe not exceptionally against Russia, but generally post-Soviet states. Corruption is an issue for all of them, for Kazakhstan, for Ukraine, for Belarus, for everyone.
But it's all over the emerging markets. It's in Africa, it's in Asia, it's not just Russia or Eastern Europe.
No, I agree, but for many emerging markets, West doesn't perceive them as part of the Western world, as in Russia. So, and if you are genuine in trying to help us build a democracy in the country, then this type of help would be appreciated, because that's not doing harm to Russian people and alienate them from the West, don't make West seen as our enemy, but vice versa, it's positioning West as our ally and ally to our prosecutors, which would search for those stolen money. In regards to gas deal, you know, it was very much advertised. I think that the price that was negotiated is a good price. And it matches the price China buys from Turkmenistan. But the issue is that they are buying gas from the eastern parts of the country, which are infrastructurally disconnected from the western Siberian and central Russia. So that means that you cannot redistribute the production which goes now to Europe and direct that to China. It's totally new gas fields which are being developed in that part of the country. And that is good that we are developing them with jobs, taxes, you know, custom duties. It's okay. The question is what we are supposed to do with those who are working for the Western economies. And I think that how we behaved in Ukraine, it would result that it would be a political issue for Europe to become independent from Russian natural resources. During Soviet Union times, Soviet Union was an extremely reliable supplier of energy resources, and we never used that as a weapon, as a political tool. Right now we are doing that every single year, and the result is that we will just lose the market, and that is very bad, and that would result in many losses for Russian economy.
Thank you. If you want to read more on that, I have a blog in the Wall Street Journal on this particular issue. You're welcome to Google China pipeline, Russia-China gas deal, and look it up. I am a little bit more pessimistic about it. The price may be a good price today, taking into account dollar inflation. And
We don't know the conditions in the formula.
The Chinese paid for the infrastructure into Turkmenistan. So the price is net to the Turkmen and the infrastructure expenditure.
But they're giving a long-term loan to build this pipeline. So it's very much similar, but it's anyway.
Yeah, but it's complicated, and I'm not sure that because the terrain is so difficult, I'm not sure it'll be a good price, actually. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Ike Cruz with Representative Sessions, and if I understood you correctly, part of the problem with the structure of the Russian government is a strong personality in the place of the president, being Putin right now. I also believe that he has a lot of support from the Russian people currently. So what needs to happen for the Russian people to see that either the constitution needs to be changed so that the president doesn't have that much power, or someone weaker is put in his place?
Indeed, President Putin has a lot of popular support these days and enjoys the highest approval ratings during his whole 15 years in power. But the nature of the regime is very well described, sorry Ariel, by Karl Marx in his book about Bonapartist regime in France, 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. No, not Louis Philippe, Louis Bonaparte.
Right.
And I highly encourage everybody who wants to understand what current Russia is to read that book, because it literally repeats everything that's going on in Russia these days. And the issue with Bonaparte was that half a year before the collapse and the revolution, he also enjoyed 70% of popular support. And then he started Prussia campaign, which was turned out to be extremely unsuccessful for France. And then the revolution happened, and he was forced to leave the country and go to Great Britain.
You're talking about the war of 1870.
Of 1870,
in which
that's
France
right.
was destroyed, basically, crushed by Bismarck.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so in terms of background.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exactly the same situation. That's why I do believe that this issue of Ukraine might turn out to be the Prussia campaign for President Putin.
Yeah. Who is Bismarck? Next question.
There were several contestants for that.
Yes. I see a hand right here, please. Can you introduce yourself?
Peter Wojciechowski with U.S. Ukraine Foundation. You mentioned the Russian militants that are fighting in eastern Ukraine. And I know some people in Russia are suggesting that if or when they are ousted from Ukraine, the guerrilla war that they are starting to instigate there is going to spread into Russia. Some disagree. What's your perspective on that?
I agree, but I wouldn't use the word spread in Russia. Those guys, they would go directly to Moscow. And, I'm all the time writing in all my public articles and saying that in public, that we are criticizing Ukraine for nationalism, but number of nationalists in Moscow, even percentage-wise, is more than in Kiev, I don't know, 10 times, 100 times. So, it's not even 2 or 3 times. Then we will receive several thousands of well-armed, experienced, and dedicated guerrilla fighters, which are coming back from that eastern parts of Ukraine. And whatever the outcome would be, whether Russia would have to enter that part of Ukraine, military, use military force there, they would be encouraged and be seen as victors and will come to Moscow and dictate what they think is needed to be done. Or Russia would not intervene, and then they would see Putin as a traitor and would again come to Moscow and again start to dictate their position. And a lot of my friends from the neoliberal flank of Russian opposition, they don't really believe that it is a big threat, because for them, biggest enemy is Mr. Putin. So I'm very much afraid that they would see this as the most capable force which can remove Mr. Putin from office. And we have a very great book in Russian, wrote in 1960s by it's a science fiction book by Strugatsky, brothers Strugatsky, and they wrote that after a period of mediocrity always comes a period of fascism, and that's what might happen.
It's a book called
After Grace
It's Hard
Comes
to Be a
Blacks.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah, after grace come the blacks. There's probably
There's a
one
question.
hand there, and probably we'll have to wrap it up after that unless somebody has
Okay.
a burning question of our time. But yeah,
Okay, forgive me if you've already answered this question, but,
can you introduce yourself, please?
oh, I'm sorry. My name is Justin Riley, and I'm an intern here in Washington, D.C. for the summer. I'd just like to ask, other than protecting Russian citizens in Ukraine and also abolishing fascist leaders in, ideals, in Ukraine, what are the other interests that Russia has in Ukraine in restoring a legitimate government to the country?
Thank you very much for that question. I slightly mentioned that it's for the minority of Russian population we are protecting Russians there. It was initial rhetorics specifically for Crimea, because Crimea is predominantly Russian. But Donetsk and Lugansk region, these eastern parts of Ukraine, they are not that much Russian. They are half and half, and the more you go to the west of Ukraine, the lesser Russians are there. And even it's hard to pretend that they are predominantly Russian-speaking, because also even Russian-speaking community is a minority there. So the rhetorics is anti-fascist. That's like public version of what we are doing there. We are fighting against Western-backed fascists. But the real interest, I think, is exactly what I started to answer with this Bonapartist effect of Putin's regime. Putin was supporting heavily and putting all the bets on Mr. Yanukovych, the former president of Ukraine. And when Mr. Yanukovych was forced to run from the country, of course that was a very scary example for the Russian opposition, generally for the Russian society. Because firstly, that meant that Putin was mistaken by putting his bets. Secondly, that it's not such a big deal to replace him. Thirdly, that even the application of military force with all these snipers and whatever that was happening in Kiev does not stop the rebellious people by removing corrupt politicians from their offices. And that, of course, has to be overshadowed by some very bright and bold moves from the Russian government. That's why I think that the invasion into Crimea was a very short-living decision. It was taken immediately after what happened with Yanukovych happened. It was not planned well beforehand. That was pretty on the spot. And with the eastern parts of Ukraine, I think that Putin is interested in instability in the Ukraine, because that would make Ukrainian government either to resign and prove that he was right and that no revolutions can be successful, or it would force them to negotiate a certain deal with the Russian government, which again would help Putin to claim victory in that particular case.
I would just add one particular geopolitical interest, just as we saw in the case of Georgia in 2008, when President Putin met President George W. Bush in Bucharest in April of 2008. He said two things. We will never agree that Georgia or Ukraine will be a member of NATO. And if you try to include Ukraine in NATO, he said, we'll dismember it and we'll take the Crimea. So all this chatter about how it was a big strategic surprise, how it was a black swan, people, there are no black swans. There's bad intelligence. And with that, I want to...
I just think that nobody actually expected that, even in the high ranks of Russian officials. You know, rhetorics is rhetorics,
But he's
threats are threats.
He's on the record and he threatened
No, yes.
to
yeah.
the President of the United States. So by instability in eastern Ukraine, the chances of Ukraine being accepted as a member of NATO is about 0 right now. And that is one of the outcomes of that. I would like to thank everybody, including our viewers on C-SPAN and our Heritage viewers on the internet. You're an excellent audience. And of course, thank our speaker and wish him all the best personally, personal safety, and also a political success to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.